Hey, it's Andrew Paul Cronin. This month I wasn't able to record a new episode of the show because my adoptive mother, who adopted me when I was 6 weeks old, passed away on February 14th. She was 73. She died alongside family, with peace of mind and a resolve that we should all be so lucky to have. As you can imagine, this has consumed my heart, my mind, and my time. In the weeks following her death, many people have mentioned how fortunate I was to have interviewed both my moms in episode 26 of the show. Listening to this episode since her death takes on a whole new meaning, and I hope that you, in hearing it, will find inspiration and comfort in her words and our story. So, here again is episode 26 of the Q&A with A.P.C. entitled Nancy and Nancy from June 17th, 2017.
But I was always sort of curious about Cronin. I thought he was some sort of wizard. I thought he was older than he was. I thought a lot of things, and then he comes, he's like, he's just this guy. But he does the full spectrum. He lives down the street. So here's Cronin.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 26, Nancy and Nancy. I was adopted in 1978 when I was 6 weeks old. 2 years ago, when I was 37, my adoption agency and I found my biological mother. This special episode of the Q&A with A.P.C. is presented in 3 parts. In part 1, I speak with my adoptive mother, Nancy. In part 2, I sit down with my biological mother, whose name is also Nancy. In part 3, Nancy and Nancy sit down together. Part 1. Nancy, my adoptive mother. One note before this part of the show begins, I have an older sister who is mentioned several times in the episode. She is also adopted. Mom, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. I'm pleased to be asked.
At what point in your life did you know or decide that you wanted to be a mother?
I think I always knew. I remember being a little girl and wanting to be a mother. And I played with dolls, and when I was at school, we played house. And we had all those trees with the moss growing around them, so we would use the moss to make our houses pretty.
Did you and Dad talk about having kids when you were dating?
We did.
And what did that sound like?
We both said we wanted kids.
Do you remember who brought it up first?
I don't. Probably me.
Do you know how far along in the relationship you started talking about that? Like how many months or years?
I would say maybe not a year, maybe 10 months.
How did you feel when you found out that you and Dad wouldn't be able to have biological children?
I thought, well, I'm sure there's a way we can be parents. And I never gave up hope.
Was it upsetting emotionally for you?
A little bit, because I thought it would happen very quickly. And it didn't. They said, doctors and things I had read said it should happen within a year. If it doesn't happen within a year, you might need to see a doctor.
Did you guys go to the doctor?
I did. He did. Yes.
Okay. And it was determined that it
was possible, but very unlikely.
that you guys would be able to have children naturally.
Yes.
So then you turned to adoption.
Yes.
Did you ever consider other options in terms of donors or surrogates or something like that?
I did. Your dad did not want to do that.
Was it ever an option for you guys not even to have kids? Like just to be married and maybe since you couldn't have children naturally or biologically, did you ever talk about, well, maybe we'll just be together and not have children?
No. I never suggested it. Your dad never suggested it. I think we always knew we wanted children.
How did you determine to do Catholic Charities as the adoption agency?
They had a good reputation, and we didn't want to buy a baby. We wanted a baby that was given up for adoption, that they cared who got the baby, and they would be some support to, Catholic Charities would be some support to us.
So once you moved to Virginia, you had my older sister. She was 3 years old or so at the time, and you
Yes.
started the process of finding.
Well, they said we could not apply for a baby until she was at least 3.
So she was 3, you had moved to Virginia, and then what happened?
Well, we said we would like to have another baby. And they said, okay, well, you can put in your application and we'll do another home study. So they did another home study.
In the home study, what kind of things specifically did they ask you? Or did you have to have certain qualities or personality traits or certain professional sort of job qualifications?
I don't think that was part of it. I think it was more like who we were as people, what our values were, what our family structure was like. I remember them asking a lot about how we were raised and what we would change when we raised our children. And everybody wants to change something.
After the home study, when did you first hear about me? What did they tell you about me?
Oh, I would say it was probably 6 months. They said they had a baby boy. He was healthy. He was tall. He was long. They didn't say tall. He was a beautiful baby.
What did they tell you about my biological parents and their situation?
They told us how old they were, and they did make a point to say how beautiful your mother was. She could have been a model. She was so pretty. They didn't have much information about your father, except they told us how old he was, and I think they said he was in the military, I think. And they told us we could come and gave us a day and see you. And so we went and we saw you. And you were so adorable. We held you and so they wanted to know what we thought, and we thought we want him.
How old was I?
You were 6 weeks old.
What was I referred to as at the adoption agency? Because I guess I didn't have a name. I wasn't given a name at birth.
You were given well, I guess the foster family gave you a name. They called you Chris.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, Chris Cronin, no, that just doesn't work for me.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to name you Michael, and we had talked about that. And then after I saw you that first time, I thought, well, he doesn't look like a Michael. And I really thought you looked like a George, but it just didn't seem like a name for a little 6-week-old baby. So we named you Andrew. We had friends that had a son named Andrew, and he was a nice little boy.
How old was I, and how did you and Dad tell me for the first time I was adopted?
We just always told you. There was no sitting you down and saying you're adopted. I think you always knew. And if people would come, and people did come to see you, and would say, see our beautiful baby that we just adopted? And there was no secrecy about it.
Was that something you and Dad talked about between the two of you, about how you wanted to handle it and discuss it or reveal it?
Don't know. I can't remember. But there was no point where we tried to
There was no-
pretend it didn't you weren't adopted.
There was no sit down thing.
No.
What was your reaction when I called you and told you that the social worker at the adoption agency had found my biological mother?
I was very happy for you. You had been wanting that for a long time. And I think, in retrospect, it happened at the perfect time.
How did you feel about you and your role?
The same as I always felt. I feel like I'm your mother. And I love you, and I want you to be happy.
Are there traits that are not genetic that I've learned from you and Dad?
You liked for us all to be together. I liked that too. You were a very cheerful, happy, funny little boy.
Are there traits that you feel I was born with?
Yeah, I think you were born to be kind. You've always been very kind to people. I think you have an innate understanding of people, and I think it's a gift, and I think you use it wisely.
Thanks, Mom.
I love you.
I love you.
Okay, bye.
Second phone. Bye. Bye. Part 2. Nancy, my biological mother. This part of the show begins with a conversation about how she met my biological father. When did your relationship start? How old were you?
Well, I met him in ninth grade. My best friend at the time, Kathy, and I were taking a French class, and we met two guys, Bob and Rick. They were seniors. Kathy and I stumbled upon them one day and started talking to them, and that began the friendship, and that was in the fall of 1975. Bob left to join the Army. He went down to Georgia, was stationed in Georgia, and joined the Army, and we began a relationship.
Did you have reservations about him going south, going to Georgia, and like leaving? He had graduated?
He had graduated from high school,
Yeah.
yes. And his goal was to become an Army Ranger, airborne.
The jumping out of the plane.
Yes, and he did that.
Had he met your parents?
Oh, yes.
Oh, so he was...
Oh, yes,
so it was
absolutely. Over at the house, right. Yeah.
When did you discover that you were pregnant?
I got pregnant in May of my sophomore year. And I remember having a sore throat and my mom taking me to the doctor and getting a prescription for an antibiotic. And a couple days later, I commented to Mom that my throat still hurt. And she asked if I was taking my medicine. And I said no. And she asked why. And I told her that I thought I might be pregnant. She took me to the health department and we did a test and determined that I was expecting. And so then we went home, and I remember her asking who else knew, and I told her I had told my younger sister.
What was your mom's reaction at the health department?
I think at that point she was probably eager to sit down and talk to Dad about it too. So we went home and talked to Dad, and of course they were not happy. Mm-hmm. I'm the oldest of four children in 4 years. I was, and still am, a good girl and very responsible. And I knew they were disappointed and they were angry and they were hurt.
How did you feel?
It was a very different feeling for me than it was for them, because I always loved babies. I was always the one when Dad was a lector and would do baptisms at Mass. I would stay after Mass with Dad to see the babies. And I babysat from a very, very young age. I loved babies and I loved helping. So I was in love with your father, and I definitely did not get pregnant on purpose. Mm-hmm. In fact, it didn't happen often. I mean, I remember exactly when this happened. it was a very shocking, disappointing, scary thing from my parents. And the other thing is my dad was in politics. He was on the board of supervisors. So this was not going to be a private thing. This was going to be kind of a public thing. So after we talked to my parents, I remember going downstairs to my bedroom, and if I remember correctly, Bob walked in the basement door. And so there must have been a phone conversation where I told him. I don't remember, but I do remember going down the stairs and him walking in the door and hugging me. And, I think just saying, it's going to be all right. We'll get through this. And then he asked my father if he could marry me. And that scenario would have been, I would have stopped going to high school and I would have moved down to Georgia where he was stationed. And I guess I would have had his health care and had you. And my father said no. He didn't think that was a good idea for us to get married and for me to go down there. So then the next thing I remember, in the natural reaction that parents would have to finding out that their 15-year-old daughter was pregnant, they said that Bob and I couldn't see each other anymore. They didn't want this behavior to continue. And there were times when he would come home to visit and we would meet up. And I remember it must have been fall because the community that we lived in had a lake. And I met Bob down at the lake. And he playfully picked me up and held me over the water. And I knew that because it was fall, the water was probably cold. And I fussed at him that I can't get wet. I can't catch cold. I'm carrying a child and I felt very, very responsible for you. And so he drove me half the way home. And of course, because we couldn't be seen. And I got out of the car and I remember thinking and actually hearing a voice saying that you can't raise a child with a child. And I felt like I had seen signs of immaturity, but in his defense, I suddenly became very mature when I was carrying you, and I just didn't feel like we were on the same page. And so it was at that point that I decided that I thought it was best to place you for adoption.
Were there times during your pregnancy that you went back and forth on your decision to place me for adoption?
The voice that I heard at the lake was so strong that there was no wavering in my mind. And I feel bad looking across the table and saying that to you, but it gave me strength. It gave me strength to hold you in the hospital the whole time you were there. It gave me strength to go back and see you 9 days later.
I guess the question is more of, like, did you ever think about abortion as opposed to putting me up for adoption?
No.
Can you explain why?
Well, my family is Catholic, and it wasn't an option, and it's not something that I would have wanted. I wasn't afraid to carry you. We went into the hospital to deliver you late at night on January 8th, and you were born early in the morning on January 9th. And the thing that strikes me, it was an easy delivery. You were born early in the morning. I remember being in the hospital bed the next morning and the nurse coming in, maybe 7:30, and throwing up the blind and saying it's time to get up. But the thing that was very special, Andrew, is when we went to the hospital the night of the 8th. It was raining. And when we woke up the morning of the night, there was snow on the ground. So we leave the hospital and go home. And I know that you're in foster care. I know you're not with your adoptive parents yet. and I wanted to see you again. And I wrote a letter because I wanted you to know that when you were ready, I wanted you to come find me. And I wanted you to be given the letter when you were 16, since that was the same age I was. So my good friend Jeffrey drove me to Fairfax to see you when you were 9 days old. And he had the presence of mind to bring a camera. And he took pictures of us together. And I left you with the letter I wrote for you. And Grampy, my dad, your grandfather, composed a poem that we also left to be given for you, given to you. And Catholic Charities said that it would be given to your parents.
Are you up for reading the letter?
I am. It's dated January 17th, 1978. So you were 8 days old. To my beautiful baby boy, I know you're not a baby anymore, but that's the way I know you. You're 16 years old now and have a right to know about your natural parents and our feelings. This is hard for me to put down on paper. There is so much I want to tell you. Your father and I love you very, very much. You were created out of our love for each other, and because we love you, we decided to let someone raise you who could give you what you need. All we can give you is love. Right now I'm only 16 and haven't experienced enough of life yet to teach you and give you all you deserve. You've taught me so much about love. Your father and I don't resent you and don't think of you as a mistake. You're a beautiful person. I knew you were strong when I was carrying you. You let out some strong kicks in those 9 months. Sometimes it even felt like you were turning completely around. When you were 2 days old, my mother was feeding you, and you lifted your head up and turned it around to look at me. Your father said you were a beautiful baby. He took off your blanket and looked you all over. He said you'd be a track star with those strong legs. You loved to hold on to my finger and squeeze with all your strength. We're dying to know who you look like and what you like to do. It's so hard to picture you all grown up. You've got so many friends and relatives who love you so much. They all came to see you in the hospital and said how you look like your daddy. That's what the nurse told me right after you were born. Since you're a boy and look like your dad, maybe you'll like to do what he likes. He loves to play soccer, football, basketball, run track, and hunt. No matter what you like to do, I hope you're happy and feel we made the right decision. I'd love to see you and wanted them to give you our names when you're old enough to come find us, but they won't. Please try to forgive me because I know I've hurt you. I just did what I felt was best. I love you. Your mom. P.S. Happy birthday.
I never received your letter that you wrote to me that I was to open when I was 16, nor did I receive the poem, and I wasn't aware of the existence of either one of those until 2 years ago when we were able to be reunited and connected with each other. The law in the state of Virginia is, in order to, if you are the person who was adopted, you have to be 18 years old before you can legally search for someone. And I always knew that growing up. My adoptive parents were always very open and honest about me being adopted. It was never a secret. It was nothing that I was ever embarrassed of or protective of. When I was 18, I contacted Catholic Charities and asked to conduct a search. Catholic Charities has 2 tiers. The first tier is a free tier that doesn't cost any money, that they give you that they call non-identifying information, which is 3 stapled pieces of paper with 2 columns, one for biological mother, birth mother is what it said, and birth father. And it had your ages and your appearance and your special interests, your interests, and some family descriptions. And so my feeling has always been, I didn't know why I wasn't able to get those to the poem and the letter at that time when I was 18, because it must have been in my file. But we don't know the answer to that.
And your parents told you the little bit that they knew about us.
Yes. Before I was 18, again, my parents were always very open about it and always said if I were adopted, I would want to know too. So they were always very supportive in my potential search before I was 18, and also once I became 18. They were always very supportive and had a real understanding that they were my parents and always would be my parents. Which was great because it gave me the freedom to feel like I could exercise whatever level of search that I wanted to.
Well, your parents told you that we were young. They told you the reason that we placed you for adoption.
Right. They always said that you were a freshman and that he was a senior. That made sense to me. Do you remember what you were told about my legal rights to search for you?
I just knew that the records were sealed in Richmond. I assumed that you got the letter and you would search for me when the time was right for you. I did start to worry as time went on. I have a dear friend who's adopted, and she has concerns about not having medical records, family medical records. So there was a time, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, that I contacted Catholic Charities and told them that I had updated medical information if they would pass it along to you. And they said they would have someone contact me, and they never did. And because so much time had gone by, it did plant the seed that maybe something had happened to you and you weren't out there.
There were many times, and I don't know specifically how many times, but there were many times between receiving the non-identifying information that I attempted to do the next step, which was to conduct a full investigation or search, which was always what I wanted to do. But Catholic Charities had a fee of $400. And when I was 18, I didn't have $400. And when I was in college in my 20s, I didn't have $400. I just didn't have the money to throw the money to the wind to see what would happen to it, to see what would come of it. Which I guess sounds, I don't know how does that sound cold? Does that make...
No, because I truly think that it happened when it was supposed to happen. I mean, I wouldn't change anything about this. So what is it that made you decide to search?
Well, there were so many things. Like I wanted anything that I was able to get, whether it was a photograph or a name or meeting you. Like I had always thought about all the possibilities, fantastic possibilities, which I think ours is. When I thought of like the perfect situation, I don't really think it's not as perfect as it has turned out to be.
I agree. Do you think expecting your child, knowing that you were expecting a son, placed any emphasis or expedited your desire to?
Yeah, it was a combination of my wife being pregnant and seeing what that's like, and having the money. And having her support me and sort of gently pushing me to actually do it. Because she said at one time, the only thing that I can think of that you haven't really followed through with in your life is this. And to me, that this was the thing that probably more than anything in my life that I should be following through with would be to know that I had done as much as I could do legally on my end, so that my head was clean with, all right, Andrew, you did as much as you are legally able to do. Because I was sort of carrying that weight.
Right.
And so a combination of having the money, her being pregnant, and her encouragement to follow through with it.
Right.
Did you ever attempt to find me or contact me?
I didn't. Don, my husband, suggested a couple of times that I guess there are websites that you can go on. You could put in a place that someone was born and a birthday and kind of see what came up. And I really appreciated his interest and his encouragement, but I just said he'll find me when he's ready.
Because you were always under the assumption that I'd received the letter.
Yes. So I kept not only a copy of the letter and a copy that I made of my father's poem, but I kept a photo album of pictures, the ones of you and I at the adoption agency when you were 9 days old, pictures from the hospital after you were born with our family, and also pictures of your father.
My vision and idea of you was that you were sort of wondering what was taking so long.
I was wondering what was taking so long, and I felt like you had a journey that you were on. And I felt like when it was time in that journey for you to find me, you would. I didn't want to step into your journey if it wasn't the right time for you.
It bothers me that the journey took so long.
But we can't second guess our story, Andrew.
So my wife was pregnant. I had $400 and I had some time, and I decided to go through with it. I sent the information to Northern Virginia. I believe I probably followed up with a phone call to make sure things were received. The Northern Virginia Catholic Charities, the policy was to send it to Richmond. I then called Richmond in advance of them receiving the information from Catholic Charities saying, my name is Andrew Cronin. I was adopted through Catholic Charities. They are going to be sending you information. Basically, will you let me know when this information is received? I had contact points on both ends. And then I had to agree to go through a psychological evaluation through Catholic Charities here in the Tidewater area of Virginia. We sat down and it was like a therapy session. I told her all the things I knew and my experiences and sort of my false starts over the course of all the years, and asked her had she had any success. And she had had success with a few, way more failures than successes. And that she wished me luck and sent her findings to Richmond, which I think was sort of the final connector in terms of the legality of it. And then it wasn't too much time after that I was at work, and I had a message on my phone, a missed call from a Northern Virginia number, and I was teaching, and I remember the phone was on vibrate, and I saw the name pop up. And so the students went to lunch, and I remember standing up and looking out the window of my classroom and like sliding the thing to unlock the voicemail. And I remember her saying, "Hi, Andrew, it's Melissa from Catholic Charities. I want to let you know that I found your biological mother, and you call me when you have a minute." And it just seemed like, man, was it really that easy? It just seemed like really easy, because it was a handful of months, I think, from once, like literally like 3 or 4 months of me signing the paperwork and making a few follow-up phone calls. She found you. So I called her back. I remember saying, like, what was her name? What did she sound like? Did she sound nice? So I just started asking a bunch of questions, and some questions she could tell me, and some questions I remember asking her, does she live in Virginia? And I remember her saying yes. And that was really exciting, because I felt like, wow, like this is really, like this could happen really soon. And being excited, but also like I've been saying all my life, oh, I'm really, like, I'm ready. And now being like, oh, am I ready? I almost could see the pieces like moving into place that were always just seemed so just in their own orbit, that were so hard for me to gain control of. It just was an incredible moment. I remember her telling me, you sounded very nice, and that you sounded very excited, and that this was the first time in Melissa, the social worker's experience, where both the biological parent and the person who was adopted both seemed so happy and, pleased.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you remember from your phone conversation with Melissa, the Catholic Charities social worker?
I remember being home and the phone rang and I couldn't get to it right away. And I went to it and the caller ID said Catholic Charities. And I listened to the message and called them back. And her question to me was, did you have business with us in 1978? And I said I did. I had a son and I placed him for adoption. And she said, well, someone is looking for you. And that was all she told me. And I was elated. I hoped it was you. She didn't even tell me that it was you that was looking for me. She just said someone was looking for me. And then the phone conversations continued. She told me that there was paperwork that I needed to sign to have the records sealed. I asked her questions like you to see how much I could get out of her. Mm-hmm. I asked if you were within a couple-hour drive, and she said yes.
You wrote the first email to me.
Yes.
And then I wrote you
correct
another email, a follow-up email.
Before I emailed you, I needed to know your name, she said, and she told me your name was Andrew. And I was blown over because that's my father's name and my brother's name, and I did not give you that name.
And I was surprised because I think my first phone call with Melissa, when she said that she had found you, she told me that your name was Nancy, which is my adoptive mom's name. So both my moms are named Nancy.
Yes.
And your dad and brother
are named Andrew.
And my wife is named Ashley.
And my oldest daughter's name is Ashley.
My sister, my adopted sister, who's 4 years older, her name is Catherine, and we always called her Kate.
And my youngest daughter's name is Katie.
And I'm a teacher.
And I'm a teacher.
How did you know what to write in your email?
I didn't know what to write. I didn't want to overwhelm you with information. Like, for example, I didn't even tell you about Grampy's poem because I didn't want to inundate you. I just wanted to communicate to you that I did have these artifacts, the letter and the picture, and that you were always loved and thought of, and that I am overjoyed that you have started this journey.
The idea of writing an email like that is so, for me, was just overwhelming.
It's paralyzing. It is.
It is, yeah. So I felt like there were things that I felt like I had to say, but I mean, how could you not? I was just worried there was going to be this stream of consciousness stuff.
Right.
But I felt like I had to let you know, like I was okay, and some background information and a little bit about myself.
Your first sentence is just letting me know that you had a wonderful life.
So I sent this to Melissa, who forwarded it to you. Dear Nancy, it's hard to know where to begin. I'll start by saying that my life is truly wonderful. It is filled with love and support from my adoptive parents, from my older sister, and from my wife, Ashley, and 2 sons. I've never felt ashamed or embarrassed about being adopted. My adoptive parents have, from before I can remember, told me what little they knew about the events surrounding my birth, that you and my biological father were quite young, and that at that point in your lives, you could not provide everything you wanted to a child. I have never felt abandoned or resentful. I've thought and wondered about you my whole life. To say that I never thought about how this would all turn out would not be true. I've imagined all of the possible outcomes and situations. This is how I imagined the perfect one would start. Thank you for sending a photograph of us. I have included a few pictures of me. A few things about me. I teach 8th grade English in the public schools. I'm a people person. I like sports, and I like to play tennis, basketball, and go surfing. I play around on the guitar. I love my family. I want to know so much more about your life and tell you more about mine, but I don't know how to contain all of that in one email. I'm open to more emails and or a phone call for our next step. I am so hopeful for our future. With love and kindness, Andrew. And that was dated May 19th, 2015.
And that email just said everything I could have ever hoped for. That you had had a wonderful life and that you had been loved unconditionally. And you have been. Your parents are amazing people.
Like when I imagined all the different situations, I did picture this as a possibility. I didn't imagine all the names.
Right.
Or the job. And I couldn't have really imagined how calm and easy it is.
To be together.
Yeah.
Yes. I could never have imagined the generosity of your parents to let us into your lives, not just me, but the whole extended family, to just be so gracious to let us be a part of your life and to welcome us with open arms. It truly is a precious, precious gift.
We sent a few emails back and forth, and we eventually got confirmation from the social worker that we were able to contact one another via phone call. What do you remember about our first phone call conversations?
I remember being overjoyed. I remember sitting there with a piece of paper and a pen. Don snapped a picture.
I think I had a pen and paper too.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like it was note-taking needed to happen.
Right.
Right?
There was a lot of
A lot
information
happening
shared. A
quickly.
lot. That's
Yeah.
when you told me about the non-identifying information. I was worried that you were going to be inundated with this big family, but come to find out you knew how many people were in the family
Right.
all along. It was a wonderful time of sharing. It was wonderful to hear your voice and just the similarities that were shared.
What were your feelings or fears about the face-to-face meeting?
I don't know that I had fears, Andrew. I guess the fear that I had was that I was going to disappoint you. As far as you were concerned, I was just so excited to dive in and find out all about you. Just the layers of an onion, just to ask questions and just find out and to look at you and to touch you and to look at your fingers again and your feet and your hair and your eyes and find out the things that you love and you enjoy and to meet your family.
Mm-hmm. I remember just getting out of the car and almost feeling like I was looking down at my shoes, but also like looking up. And it wasn't until like we sat down at the table where we could just sort of
Relax and be together.
Yeah. How does our relationship feel different from your relationship with Katie and Ashley?
When you watch a child grow, you're so excited to see what they're going to grow up to be, what they're going to love to do, what they're going to look like, what their talents will be. And that develops slowly, slowly, slowly over years. I watched that with Ashley and Katie. With you, you were a fully formed man who came in all at once. So it's the opposite. Whereas with them, it's the layers being put onto the onion to form themselves. And with you, I got this fully formed adult. I saw you at 9 days old, and then I saw you again at 37. So now there's this beautiful process of peeling things back and finding out who you are.
How am I like you? What have you found in peeling away the onion?
We're both very interested in people. We're both very sensitive. We're both very loving, caring, devoted to family. We both cherish the past. Both very sentimental.
Very sentimental.
We both like to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
We both love to be outside. We both chose to go to college near the water.
Are there traits that I have from Bob, my biological father?
You have his eyes. You have his interest in sports. But as far as personality, you're more my side of the family.
Mm-hmm. Are there traits that I have from my adoptive parents?
Yes, they exposed you to a lot of music and arts, And your appreciation of the arts and of music, I think, comes from them. Grampy played the guitar, so I see you doing that as he did. But the exposure of different cultures, traveling experiences, I definitely think are gifts from them.
Oh, I love you.
I love you too, Andrew. I appreciate you doing this. I think it's a wonderful gift that you've given, finding me and our family, and I hope this show is a gift to others. I hope it gives them hope.
Part 3. Nancy and Nancy sit down together. My biological mother speaks first.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
What part of Andrew do you enjoy most?
He's very affectionate, and he's very open with his affection. And he's got a wonderful sense of humor.
He does.
And he's so good to look at. There's a lot that I like. What do you like best?
I think one of the things I like the best is that he is such a devoted family man. He loves Ashley. He's very devoted to her. He's very devoted to the boys. My parents commented on that too, just how he's so involved in the boys' upbringing. He's a hard worker,
Yeah.
but yet he has a good balance of fun and hard work. He has many different talents. Yeah, he's a great guy.
He is a great guy. We did a good job. Yeah. Both of us. Yeah.
What were your thoughts when Andrew told you Catholic Charities had found his birth mother?
Well, I was very happy for him because he had been looking for a long time. And Catholic Charities, I was quite disappointed in them that they weren't more helpful to him. They had originally given him unidentifying information, and that was good to know. It was health kind of stuff. But then they wanted money to give him more identifying stuff. And I thought, this is not right. And I give them money every year. I do contribute to them. I think they do wonderful things. But it needs to carry on beyond just babyhood.
It's a hardship for a lot of children to
It is.
come up with that money to find their
Yes.
birth parents.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it was good, I think, because by the time he had the money, he was pretty settled. And it wasn't like he was still in that stage where they're trying to figure out who they are. He knew who he was. He knew what he wanted. But he wanted you in his life, too. So I can understand that. I think if I had been adopted, I would always want to know, wouldn't you?
I would.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how much your empathy means. Do you remember what you said the first time we met?
I don't. I was very emotional. I know that. But I tend to be emotional at times.
You and I embraced, and you pulled back and looked at me and you said, Andrew has been waiting to meet you his whole life.
He has.
And I just can't tell you how grateful we are that you are so open and that you let not only me but my whole family into Andrew's life.
I think it's wonderful that it's worked out so well. I don't know of another adoption story that has worked out so well, actually. And I think it's because we're both Nancy's.
Right. Besides the name, is there anything else you think we share? Any other similarities?
Well, he has mentioned this to me. He gets on something and he wants to convince me that he's right. And I have my own ideas. And he said, you kind of keep digging too.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Whereas
we have
I
to
let
know the
things-
why.
I let things go. You know? Enough.
So that's a similarity between Andrew and I. Do you see similarities between you and I?
I do. Well, obviously, we both love Andrew.
Right.
I think we're both pretty family oriented.
Yes, absolutely.
We have the same name.
Mm-hmm.
You have a brother named Andrew, a father named Andrew. I just find it. Do you know about synchronicity?
No.
It's like there's a time for things to fall into place. It was meant to be.
It was.
I do think it was meant to be.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, why would I have named him Andrew?
Right. Right. And then there's the Ashley and the Katie.
Yes.
And the, right.
Yes.
And all
yeah.
of those names happened at different times. They didn't all happen at once.
And we didn't even know
And
it.
we didn't know. And those decisions were made by different people. It's an amazing puzzle that has come together.
It is. Yes.
Is it difficult to share Andrew and his family?
No, it's really not. I don't feel at all threatened. I really don't. He has always been I can't say always, but those teenage years can be a little hard. But he's always been a very loving son. I've been very lucky. I know everybody isn't so lucky, but I have been lucky. And I want him to be happy. That's what my parents wanted. It's what your parents, everybody wants their children to be happy.
The most difficult part, the trickiest part for me in this journey is that there are no rules.
No.
And we just keep checking in with one another to make sure that we're not stepping on anyone's toes or hurting anyone's feelings or overstepping anyone's boundaries or
Right.
putting expectations where we don't deserve to put expectations. So
Right.
it's just so far been this beautiful dance, and I am just so appreciative to have you as my partner.
Well, I am too, because it does make him happy. It's like, how can you have too many people that love you?
It's true. That's a wonderful way to look at it. Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy because he's happy.
It couldn't get any better than this.
I just think, isn't this great?
It is.
Is that good?
Yeah, well, you guys can keep talking as long as you want.
We could edit some more. Or we could eat. You want to eat?
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, visit QAAPC.com. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley. The music was arranged by Soup.